Hi, folks. Welcome to today's webinar on security testing and vulnerability assessment. I'm delighted to once again have two industry veterans and subject matter experts in all things related to vulnerability management. My longtime colleague, Christopher Galicki, and Jake White, a security engineer with Tenable. So I was reading a report recently from Gartner, and they said that in the region of 75% of organizations don't have adequate investment in attack surface management or in continuous asset discovery. And in many cases, these organizations are storing their asset inventory in Excel spreadsheets. And what was a real wake-up call for me was Log4j, which happened in December. And I feel like it was a wake-up call for the industry as a whole, because overnight we saw many large global corporations scrambling to try and understand what assets they had and what assets were potentially running Log4j on their operating systems. And there was thousands of hours and days and weeks thrown at that specific problem. But one thing is for sure, vulnerability management is not a simple process. There's many challenges which organizations have to face, from shadow IT, an increased volume of vulnerabilities on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. I believe the new vulnerabilities coming on stream now per year exceed 25,000. There's a lack of visibility into assets. There's mergers and acquisitions where you buy in risk to the business. And then there's investments in new technologies. So it is definitely a complex area, and really looking forward to drilling down into how we should approach this problem with Chris and with Jake. So to kick it off, Jake, I might start with you. And I need to ask you first, have the Bills, you're coming to us all the way from Buffalo, so have the Bills won a Super Bowl yet?
Not yet, but we keep praying, right?
Okay.
So maybe sometime soon, but
Okay, good.
not yet.
Okay. So Jake, with the in your opinion, what has the evolution of the vulnerability management market been? Well, if you could talk through maybe what you've seen over the course of the last few years and where you feel this is going.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been supporting the vulnerability management market. Prior to being at Tenable, I worked at Ingram Micro Distribution. So I've seen a lot of evolution in the security market at large over the past couple of years, and that absolutely includes vulnerability management. A lot of the evolution in that market has been people continuing to realize exactly what you said. A major vulnerability comes out. It immediately wakes everybody up to the fact that, we don't know whether or not we are vulnerable to this particular thing, and needing some sort of tool to go out there and figure things out. Now, we've seen a lot of those solutions pop up out in the wild, and we've seen a lot of vendors try to tackle this problem. But the main takeaway that I've seen in the market has been an increase in customer knowledge of this is something that we need to take more seriously as a part of our security program. And secondly, from the vendor side of the house, we've seen a lot more investment in tools to kind of broaden, I'd say, the tool belt, right? So originally, you'd see just a lot of scanning tools out in the market that would just go, you run your cursory scan, you get a report, and that's it. However, as time has progressed, we've seen a lot more investment in ongoing vulnerability management, where you look at your trending over time, which I think is much more impactful. And the second thing that I've seen in the vulnerability management market has been an increase in the proliferation of tools to look at different kinds of IT, because there's been such a sprawl in different types of places where attackers can get in. We've seen that in the wild with attackers going against all sorts of different stuff, right? Log4Shell, Log4j has been a great example of things that are internet-facing web assets. But you look at things like the Target breach from a couple of years ago, that was an attack on an HVAC system, right? How do I look for vulnerabilities and scan on that? It gets a lot of IT professionals thinking, and that's where the market, in terms of the vendors and the tools they offer, has started to broaden quite a bit, is to deal with that kind of issue.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, right? And I want to just challenge that for a moment, right? Because I think that in a perfect world, organizations are getting to a level of maturity where they're patching their systems, they're understanding their assets, and they're bringing the OT and the ICS into the fold, right? But I believe in reality, given the lack of resources, given the stretched nature of budgets, that in reality organizations are really wrestling with that problem. Christopher, I mean, from your perspective, you're at the coalface of this industry for the last 15 years, working with companies on deep dive vulnerability assessments, penetration testing, offensive security, both in an incident response capacity, but also in the capacity of helping them to harden their systems. Are organizations starting to effectively bring the OT and the ICS under this umbrella of their security hardening, or is that still a pipe dream? Where's that going?
Thank you, Ronan. At the moment, this is definitely IoT and cloud environment are taking into the consideration as a high risk. In past years, definitely it was pushed behind. Definitely, organization focused only or mostly on a web application or internal structure of or external structure of their network and their system. But during the time, the landscape changes, and a lot of vulnerabilities now affecting IoT, cloud, or API solutions. So definitely the market is moving that way.
I get that point, right? But I guess what I'm trying to get to here, right, is that I think organizations understand that the likes of Log4j are becoming more prevalent. These high profile vulnerabilities are becoming more problematic. But I guess my question is this: are organizations really actually taking this seriously now from an OT or an industrial control system perspective? I mean, Jake, Chris, I'll open that question to both of you. In theory, we know it's important, right? Because we're security practitioners. But I guess my question is it actually now becoming reality?
It's becoming reality, but from business perspective, it's still progressing. It's still in a toddler stage. So CISO of many organizations are considering that's an important asset, but this is still progressing process. This is not such a mature as the publicly exposed endpoints or publicly exposed data. So this is.
Yeah. So Jake, I mean, you guys have thousands of customers. Are you seeing companies? I mean, Target happened back in 2012, right? It's over 10 years ago. Are you seeing companies of the thousands of companies that you service with your technology actually investing, and I would say more than investing, but effectively implementing technology on the OT and the ICS side of the house?
It's starting is
Okay.
what I'd say. It's still, to your point, it's been 10 years, right? And we've seen more attacks on operational technology and industrial networks. Colonial Pipeline's another good example in recent memory. They're coming around to it, right? I think that a lot of organizations are just starting to figure out, oh, this is vulnerability management and scanning and inventory of our attack surface is something that we need to spend more time and effort on. And they're just starting to get around to that. Looking at more advanced things like building automation and operational technology, they're still getting there. It's not there yet. I get a lot of inquiries that are like, hey, we're just exploring this, but we're not quite there yet. And we want to understand how you actually interact with these systems. I think a part of this recently has been, if you roll back the clock just 3 years, right? A lot of these operational technology networks were air-gapped. None of them ever talked to the internet. None of them were ever connected. Yes. And everybody stopped thinking about this. They said, well, it's air-gapped. I don't have to think about it anymore. COVID happened. Now it's, well, we need to remotely manage these operational technology networks because nobody can go to the site. Nobody can go to the factory floor or to the plant, right? And unfortunately, that means that they're all now exposed to the internet, and nobody has done their due diligence to actually secure these networks. So now it's, well, we left that as is because we never rolled it back to being air-gapped. So how do we protect it now? And now people are starting to ask that question because they have, they continue to have their operational networks facing the internet.
I mean, that's a super interesting point. And I guess as everything becomes more connected, the attack surface increases and it becomes risky. Christopher, over the years, I've seen you and your offensive security team in many different occasions hack into many different types of technologies. I mean, how, if you can use technologies like Shodan and so forth to scan the internet and find, all of these thousands of exposed assets that are out there, how easy is it to hack into these PLCs or these different technologies that sit out there versus, hacking into an outdated version of a Windows operating system?
Relatively easy, Ronan. Once you have a footprint into internal network, which is controlled and connected to the IoT devices, OT devices, it's relatively quickly, because these devices, they don't update so easily. So even programmers, ICS programmers, they having a lack of security competences. So they don't know how to program device to prevent from the different security issues which we might discover. So from the attacking surface perspective, definitely this is low-hanging fruit, and the business impact is huge. Once we can stop operational of the assembly line or the pipeline, the business impact is incredible. So definitely, this is something which all organization should consider as very important from the business perspective and from the security maturity perspective as well.
You mentioned something a moment ago, Chris, talking about vulnerabilities. You spoke about how predominantly, offensive security, we're looking at the application layer, and obviously the network layer is important too. How much of your time now is been taken up with looking at stuff that falls outside the standard scope of application and network, where it's bringing in the OT layer?
Very common practice right now. We are not only focusing on the elements related to the network layer or application, we're also showing and proving to the client possible business impact and implication of living OT environments unprotected. So this is possibly right now between 15 and this rising.
Okay. Jake, talk to me about vulnerabilities. I mean, I think Gartner is saying that the scale of vulnerabilities on a daily basis is anywhere between 50 and 80 new CVEs per day. That's anywhere between 25 and 30,000 CVEs per year. There's a whole set of implications when we talk about these CVEs, right? In terms of, do we have those assets on our network? How serious are they? Does patching them have implications in terms of our business? Can you talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing in relation to how your technology and organizations are helping to deal with this prolific increase in the number of CVs that are coming? Because you could almost argue it's getting to a stage where it's becoming unmanageable, right? If you haven't got a proper program of works in place.
Well, I mean, it's more good news for Chris, right? Because it makes his job easier in terms of going out and trying to break into networks, because there's just so many new avenues, right? You don't have to work as hard anymore when you're like, look at all this attack surface I can go after, right? But yeah, we've absolutely seen a ton of sprawl in new vulnerabilities, and I think it's kind of a twofold thing, right? The first thing is that IT sprawl is a major issue. It used to be, when I started in the industry, now I have to think about it. When I started in the industry like 15, 16 years ago, it's been a while. But when I first started in the industry, you looked at a data center, and a data center was basically it, right? It's like, okay, we've got endpoints, we've got, some switches, we've got a firewall, maybe we've got, our servers and some of our other networking odds and ends, printers, stuff like that. But the network was fairly simple, right? And everything lived in your nice locked data center. You had, you had to worry about like firmware or like remote monitoring vulnerabilities and stuff like that. It wasn't difficult to wrap your arms around all of those IT devices and protect them. Now your IT's everywhere, right? You've got the cloud. We've been talking about operational technology, right? You have a proliferation of all sorts of new endpoints, not just stuff that's running a standard, thick operating system. You've got tablets, phones, You've got all sorts of software sprawl. It's just everywhere now. And so as a result, we're seeing so many more vulnerabilities because there are so many more platforms that businesses need to use to be operational today versus 10, 15 years ago. So absolutely, there's a whole bunch of sprawl there. And on top of that, attackers are working diligently every day to find these new things, because now that software is everywhere, well, great, there's a million new ways for me to break inside of a network, right? We're not even, we're talking about vulnerabilities today. We're not even talking about like social engineering and stuff like that, which is a whole other avenue of attack. It's not my purview as a vulnerability management guy, but the human factor also is a piece of this as well. So there's a ton of ways for people to be able to break in. Absolutely, kind of getting back to your original point, Ronan, one of the things that we have seen happen is there's a shift now in the way that people need to look at vulnerabilities in their networks, right? The Excel spreadsheet's not going to cut it anymore. You need a robust software suite to be able to understand an inventory of what you even have to begin with. Because I think, ask any IT administrator of a fairly large network, I don't think they can tell you what they have, right? For starters, much less what vulnerabilities are coming along for the ride with what they have. We see sometimes customers will stand up scanning with one of our products, conduct a scan, and they go, oh, I didn't even know these two subnets talk to each other. I accidentally scanned 13,000 IP phones. Are those a vulnerability?
Jake, let me try and put some context to what I believe you're saying. And I both of you to maybe share your perspectives on this, because this is what keeps me awake at night, right? And when I look at it, one thing I know is that this is incredibly complicated, because there's so many different moving parts, and having an asset repository on an Excel spreadsheet is only one piece of the problem, right? Because we've got the assets, we've got the vulnerabilities, we've got the prioritization, we've got the business continuity, we've got the lack of resources, we've got all of these problems building up. So I believe Gartner have termed the phrase attack surface management.
Mm-hmm.
And that three-letter acronym, ASM, it refers to the processes, the technology, and the managed services that are deployed around this. And that should, in theory, represent best practice, right? So everything from, okay, we got to know what assets we have, what systems we have, what associated vulnerabilities we have, and then how we're going to manage that entire process. So I'd like for maybe the rubber to hit the road here in terms of this conversation. You guys are incredibly knowledgeable. You've seen every scenario you can see in terms of the type of risk organizations face. So let's start solutioning this out, right? Let's start solutioning out what does best practice look like. And if you guys could maybe, share that perspective with me, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, I've been talking a ton, Chris. If you want to jump in and run over me here, sure. I'm more than happy.
So, Chris, do you want to maybe take like if we talk about attack surface management, because you run an offensive team there. You've got an R&D team. You guys build capabilities. So let's talk through this process on how you would apply this to a 5,000 person company, the methodology from A to Z, and then we'll start looking at how the technology that the likes of Tenable are building to help deliver these capabilities.
Of course. This is a very interesting question, Ronan. It's required to have a holistic approach of multi-layers. You have to focus on asset, application, services, endpoints, API, people as well. You have to make sure that your inventory is up to date. The changes in the network.
So Chris, can we start with assets? Can you maybe let's just focus on assets and let's move through these block by block, because assets, it's easy to say assets, but it's not that simple, right?
Of course, it's not only assets, but also the access to the services. So this is also quite important. Through the simple VPN gateway, you can get access to the network and then run the scan, get access to the domain controller completely from the outside of our organization. So this is super complex. But dividing that into small elements, you have to have a full process of acquiring information about your up-to-date assets.
Perfect. So can you talk? Can you talk? Let me give you a scenario. Okay, I'm a 5,000 person company. I've 50 sites. I've got tons of users, tons of investment in new technology and applications and infrastructure, in OT devices. How in God's name can I possibly know what assets I have sitting on my network? And they're changing every single day. How is that even possible? Jake, feel free to jump in. Tell me.
It's very, very challenging. It's very challenging. We have several different tools, application platform to run recurrent scan, to maintain your asset management infrastructure list. But every infrastructure, as you said, the distributed organization with hundreds of different offices, spaces, connected, interconnected in between themselves. They need to have responsible team to maintain the security of each unit.
Yeah,
when we have full, yeah.
I'm sorry, let me build on that, Chris. I think you bring up a really good point that gets ignored quite a bit, is kind of the time and personnel issue, right? So, from our perspective on the Tenable side of the house, right, we offer a suite of tools that allow you to scan for these things and actually collect this information. But a lot of the times where people get lost and where they come to me asking for assistance is, look, these tools are great. These are fantastic for scanning our networks, actually collecting and inventorying this information. What do I do now, right? And I think people and process is absolutely something that needs to be paid attention to, right? You have to figure, well, do we have dedicated personnel who are going to be operating this platform, actually ingesting the data and doing something meaningful with it, right? Going out and patching and actually having an impact on our attack surface, making it smaller, right? Doing something with what we've located. And I think another piece of this as well is absolutely the process. Having this wheel, I like to call it, of, okay, we go out, we conduct scanning, we assess what we find from the scan. We then come up with a remediation plan, or how we're actually going to have an impact with that data. And then we go back and we go and reassess, right?
So can I hold you there, right? Because again, I'm trying to get my head around this, and I've got this 5,000 person company. So Gartner are saying that there's 75% of people do not have a database of these assets, right? They're storing out in an Excel spreadsheet. So you guys have, I'm going to buy some of your stock. There's a big market there for this, right? So 75% of people don't have it. We now have a database, right? Mm-hmm. I guess you talk about process and you talk about people and resources. I guess there's not all assets are created equally in terms of the value that they present to the organization, either because of where they're situated, or because of what data is sitting on them, or because of their criticality in the supply chain of that business, right? So how do you then determine which assets in the organization are priority? Is it based on what they can access? Is it based on what information they hold? Is it based on their position within the network? I'm trying to break this down to baby steps to understand. Now that we have our database, what do we do next?
Yeah, that's incredibly challenging, right? And that's one of those things where if you don't have an existing asset inventory of understanding, what's important inside of your organization, it'd be very daunting to figure that out. That is actually something that one of our tools has the ability to help you out with, right? We have machine learning processes on our side. I hearken not to say AI, because we do have an AI thing coming to our product later down the road, but we'll get back to that. We have a machine learning process that will actually look at your asset inventory, and then based on the traffic going to and from it, the software apps that are installed on it, the operating system, stuff like that, right? We can actually help assign a criticality rating to those devices to help you figure out, or at least try to get in the neighborhood of sorting what's important and what's not important. Because I think that's difficult, right? Especially as we've been talking about sprawl. Servers can be in the cloud, on-prem. You've got a bunch of laptops, but which one's a C-level executive's laptop, right? Like, that's hard to figure out. Absolutely. And Chris, I want to toss the ball to you on this one, because you look at this from the offensive side of the house. Aside from vulnerability management tools, how do you guys do it if you're approaching a network offensively?
Of course, but this is very complex question. So even from the internal network surface perspective, we could, as an offensive security team, we could take over controlling your printer, get access to the credentials stored into the printer storage, and reuse it, attacking different clients. So from the risk perspective, patching printers is not a big deal, but from an attacker perspective, you can translate that into very serious impact. From the internal facing services as well. Something might be small issue from the network perspective, but we can utilize this vulnerability and we can make something bigger out of it.
I mean,
so there is no
what you've
silver bullet
yeah,
in this game.
Yeah. I mean, what you've just said is terrifying, right? I mean, you hack a printer, and if the credentials that allow access to that printer are privileged credentials, then it's game over, right?
Of course, yeah. We've done that several times already. So this is very common vector of attack.
Christopher,
and
let me ask you in that regard, right? So we have our database. Again, I'm a difficult buyer, right? I'm going to turn the screw in you in terms of figuring out how we build a program here that's really going to keep us secure. We've put in our database. Jake has come in and he sold us the technology for our asset discovery. There's now some best practice in terms of our hygiene around access credentials within the network, right? Which is an important part of vulnerability management, I'm guessing. So access to printers and access to other devices within the network, which may typically fall outside the net of the scanning we conduct, right? So let's say we've good hygiene in that regard, right? We now move to the vulnerability management. And we know there's 80 new vulnerabilities every single day. And every Tuesday, Microsoft do their Patch Tuesday. And most companies are trying to catch up on Patch Tuesday from September of last year, right? Correct. And there's a massive backlog, and they don't know whether to look at the vulnerabilities at the application layer or the network layer or the OT layer. So how practically, it's very easy to virtue signal and say patch and get it all done. In reality, that's not practical, right? For a lot of organizations. So what does best practice look like? Obviously, if you don't have, limited resource to do this, from your perspective, and then we go to the technology piece.
Of course, the key in this game is understanding weaknesses and correlate it with business impact. So one security team handing over report of the security analysis, we are sitting down with the client. We are explaining business impact, and then the patch management team can prioritize the actions, how to mitigate risk, how to focus on mitigate the potential threats, and plan it over the time. As you said, there is hundreds of vulnerability which are detected daily. So the business has to understand the prioritization process and then align resources within this process.
So Jake, how does Tenable provide do you guys provide workflows, orchestration capabilities within the platform that help make this jungle some way easier to navigate?
You're really teeing me up for this one, right? You know where we're going on this one. But yeah, we do a lot of things to help make your life easier when it comes to the products that we offer and how they kind of slot right into your existing IT infrastructure. So you talked about where you spend your time, right? That's absolutely a focus of ours. One of the things that we utilize as a part of our tool is what we call vulnerability priority rating, or VPR. So we take standard CVSS scoring that's used on these vulnerabilities, and we apply our threat research to them, because the focus for us is on, well, what are attackers actually using, right? One of the challenges we have is we look at CVSS scoring. A lot of times that's just in a vacuum, and we want to be able to understand, well, if an attacker is using this bargain basement vulnerability that's not terribly complex, but it's effective, that's really what you should be patching more than the in a bubble, this is a nightmare, oh my God type of thing. So we use our VPR rating absolutely as one of those things where we help point you in the right direction in terms of where you spend your time, right? I think another really important thing to look at is personnel, for sure. Having people who are responsible for not just the management of the platform, but then the follow-up in terms of what you need to do. And kind of going back to your point on orchestration, we also have an API on a ton of our products that goes into connecting to things like a SIM or SOAR, for reporting and looking at your organization as a whole. We connect to privileged access management systems to be able to grab credentials for scanning. We play really nice in the sandbox with a lot of stuff like that. Another thing, kind of talking about personnel, we hook into patch management solutions, and we also hook into ticketing solutions as well, right? So when we talk about, we find a vulnerability, well, we can automate that process to then automatically create a ticket in your ticketing system, be it Jira or ServiceNow or whatnot. And then from there, you assign that to a human being whose responsibility it is to go out there and actually fix the problem, right? So there's a level of accountability there because we can have a paper trail, and we can start to create this process. I talked about that wheel, right? We can actually start having an impact on that wheel of, great, we've collected the data, we've prioritized what's important, what systems are important, what vulnerabilities are important. Now we close the loop on this by actually fixing these problems, assigning people power to this, and then going back and doing a reassessment. And I think one last point to touch on is having a managed service provider or having a technology partner you can trust to come in there and help, because we know that a lot of organizations are suffering from a people power issue in terms of having enough staffing to actually be effective, yes. Right? So having somebody you can lean on, trust, say, we don't have time in our cycle for this, who can come in and help us? That's a huge one. That's absolutely huge. Especially, I'd say, you want to talk about going back to where we started our conversation on vulnerability management trends. That's probably the number one trend right now is, great, we know that we can go to Tenable for the tool, but we don't have the time to do this. Who can help us?
Yes. That's really well articulated. Christopher, talk to me about M&A. Over the years, you've been pulled in by many large corporations who are aggressive in their M&A strategy. I anticipate that the SmartTech 247 chief executive will be, I know she's got a shopping list of M&A as well, so she's going to be dragging you in to do diligence on companies. But I guess when you get into your own M&A cycle, it really hits home that the last thing you want to do is acquire a data breach, right? Whether it's a legacy data breach or it's already, a network that's been compromised. So, I mean, can you talk us through the risks and the approach that you take from an offensive security perspective when you're conducting M&A diligence for clients?
Of course, this has become a very attractive component of our offensive security service suite. The pre-acquisition process or post-acquisition testing process to check what's the current security posture of our organization, how it's aligned with the merger security processes and cybersecurity culture within bigger organization. It's crucial. We've come out several times this year highlighting the critical approaches, the critical behaviors of companies, usage, the unpatched library software usage. We highlighted and pointed out the lack of patching strategy within the organization, the holes in the software cyber security software life cycle development, and these type of issues and problems within the emerging organization is highlighted in our security approach. But this is one thing. The other thing is educate. When we come across the organization with lack of processes or lack of culture within the organization, we always educate. Okay, you have to implement several steps to fulfill these gaps. You have to implement the vulnerability assessment, regular pen testing assessment, or any other security metrics which might help you to raise the bar and raise the cybersecurity culture within the organization.
So when one of your large clients wants to conduct M&A activity, they're looking for you to give a strategic view on the asset that they're looking to acquire. How much pressure do you feel to ensure that the comprehensive nature of the report that this organization gets? How confident are you, in your ability to ensure that every stone has been turned over so that you mitigate the risk that they buy a data breach?
We are very, very confident about it. We sharpen our skills for years. nearly for decades. So our testing team is it's incredibly skilled, and definitely we don't have a half-assed approach. We definitely and fully engage into the process, and we are trying to find everything what's possible to show potential business impact and implication of this security testing.
Awesome. Jake, can you talk to me again? You know, you get to see a lot of very interesting stuff in terms of your role with Tenable, right? Can you talk to me about 0 days? I mean, we've had some really interesting 0 day vulnerabilities over the last few years, and I'm sure you guys have it. I know we have a ton of war stories when it comes to these and the panic that it creates. Can you maybe share some perspectives or any interesting stories you might or might not have that you can disclose to us?
Oh, well, I work a lot with our threat research team in terms of, making sure I'm keeping tabs on new stuff, right? I support a lot of business in the United States and North America at large. And as you can tell, I do a little bit of site support from time to time with our partners in Europe. What I would tell you is that when a 0 day comes out, it's chaos, right? We immediately jump on it. And we start, working on trying to make sure that our tools can see what these O days are to begin with, right? So I think the most recent vulnerability of this that got really everybody going was the MoveIt vulnerability that was in that management software suite, because of how easy it was to exploit and how easy it was to parlay it into other attacks, right? Much to kind of Chris's point of, well, I get into the printer, I can do a little privilege escalation and then move on from there, or capture the creds out of the printer. Same kind of idea with MoveIt, right? It's very easy to parlay that into a full-blown attack on an organization. So, we on our side, we're very diligent about that. We work hard to quickly get a plugin database ready to go for the vulnerability, get it out to our software so that way people can immediately begin scanning for it and patch for it. So we're really diligent on that. And I think, there are two sides to every coin. So while, if you have a process, if you have some of our tools in place, it lowers a lot of stress. And we've talked to plenty of partners who, because they have a process in place, because they're using our tool, it's a low, 0 days are not the stress they used to be, because it gets published. They give us a phone call. They say, can you guys see this? We say, yep, we can see it. Run your scans. They scan, they see it. They can immediately take systems offline same day until a patch is published. Or if a patch is available from a vendor, they get the patch installed, done, right? Their lives are very easy. Nobody is having a heart attack. Nobody's freaking out about anything. It's a very low stress environment.
So Jake, Jake, I want to challenge you on that.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Because with MoveIt, right?
Yeah.
We've seen, a huge volume of very substantial cyber breaches from very big names with limitless budget in terms of what they can throw at cyber, right? And I mean, 0 days still terrify me for that reason. And I think I would argue that most companies are not where they need to be in terms of the original foundation of this conversation around having the assets, having, the people, the process, the technology, all that good stuff. So I mean, I know your point, but I would argue that 0 days are probably more problematic than they've ever been due to the lack of investment in what we've discussed on this, right?
Well, I agree with you there, right? Because I'm talking about my perspective from working with the organizations that have it together. You talked about 75% of orgs don't have that experience, right?
Yes.
I'm showing you what it's like on the other side of the golden doors, right? You walk through into vulnerability management land, you've got a trusted security partner, everything's great, right?
Yeah.
Most companies are not having that experience. They are instead either completely ignorant to the fact that something bad is happening to them, or they might know that they've got systems, but hey, is the software version we have safe? Is it not? We don't know, right? So to your point, a smaller subset of customers are having that easy conversation. A lot of other customers are not having that, right? Because they're not scanning. They don't have a process. They don't have the time to look into this when 0 days come out. So they're having the exactly what you're talking about, right? They're having a very bad experience with O days. I don't mean to minimize O days by saying, just use us and it's easy, right? But like, A lot of other companies are not having that experience because they're not actively scanning. They don't have a game plan in place. They don't have a technology partner or a managed service provider partner who can conduct the scan for them, give them a phone call and say, you guys are all good, or here are 5 IPs you should take offline immediately. Instead, it's an O-Day gets launched. They're ignorant to it completely. Time goes on, an attacker probes it. Chris is out there probing networks, looking for new systems to get into. And it's very easy when you have these high priority items like this because it's a cakewalk. I'll bring up a very good add-on point to this. Here in the States, I'm a part of a collective of technology professionals that work with the FBI, and I get regular updates from the FBI as far as like what vulnerabilities are new out there, what they're seeing in terms of utilization by attackers. One of the top exploits that are still out there being used today for successful breaches into networks is Log4Shell, Log4j. Yeah. This thing has been out for a while now.
Yeah, we see that.
Yeah, and you'd think, oh well, people know about it. They should be patching for it. They should have it. No, not even close. Because to your point, most organizations are not mature enough to deal with this yet. And so a zero-day vulnerability gets launched, and you'd think everybody should scramble to get on top of it. They don't. It just sits around in their network, and eventually they get breached by it, and they're like, oh, right, Log4Shell, Log4j, we should have done something about that. Hindsight's 2020, right? Like that is the experience of most organizations, not the easy street thing that I was talking about earlier.
I definitely concur with you on that. Christopher, let me pivot for a moment, right? SmartTech 247 offers, 24/7 SOC, a very comprehensive managed service suite, and all of our clients have a degree of vulnerability management. Some are more mature in terms of their investment in that capability. Some are struggling with resources and budget to deal with it. And in every scenario, organizations need to cut their cloth to suit their measure, right? So while we work very closely with Tenable, a lot of our clients have different tools and different technologies, and we have to be product agnostic, right? Given the nature of what we do. So over the last 36 months, you've been investing very heavily in our own R&D capabilities, trying to drive consolidated view of vulnerability, irrespective of the tools that are being used. Can you talk to us a little bit about the type of innovation that we're building and how that's helping, given the disparate nature of tools which could be in our client sites?
Of course. As you know, every platform, every tool has some pros and cons. So we utilize our knowledge from offensive security perspective. We building together Threat Hub, which is a platform of the orchestration and management of this tools information which our tooling are provided. At the top of it, we are adding our offensive security experience, building the suite of tools and outputs which are tailored to the company needs. So sometimes the time between detection of release the new vulnerabilities and building rules how to detect them is crucial. So different platforms, different tools are using are better or worse in terms of updating the plugins, procedures, etc. So we are taking the best of the best. We are adding the flavor of our offensive security experience and our engineering experience, giving the platform which is possibly one of the most accurate right now in the market.
Okay, cool. Can you maybe, we're coming up on our 45 minutes, but before we wrap up, I always remember a few years ago conducting an offensive security engagement for a client. You guys were able to successfully exploit firmware on an old Cisco ASA at the edge, and you were able to get into the core of the network and, like you described, escalate privileges, and it's open season then in terms of the damage that can be done. I guess this is a bit of a curveball, right, in terms of a question, but how difficult is it to convey vulnerabilities from an offensive security engagement to a client? Because I guess, it's a bit like telling them their baby is ugly, right? if you find a lot of problems, substantial problems, is there an art form in being able to, because I mean, somebody has to be responsible for, you know, a shabby state of vulnerability management. Is there an art form in delivering that message, or is it just, you know, a hammer message that you deliver?
The key element is understanding that we are here to help our clients. We are not here to show the baby is ugly, as you said. Our process and our approach is to help the client to get better maturity of the cybersecurity, better understanding of the risk, potential business impact, and to help client to prioritize actions to close the doors, to strengthen their security posture. And this process is not that difficult as you can imagine. Once the client understands we are on their side, we are here with our skills, experience, and an incredibly talented team to support them. The conversation gets really easy.
How often, Christopher, is your offensive security capability, how often is it aligned to compliance rather than security? Is that common where somebody wants to get a compliance badge and they, you know, they're not overly bothered by security, they just want to get to compliance, you know?
Of course, it's very often, but our approach is completely different. It's not table exercise. We are showing that the compliance means something. So let's say a company wants to get ISO 27001 certification or PCI DSS. We take it very serious. So we want to show the real threat. We're not going to just tick off the boxes. We are showing the real threat, real threat landscape, and the understanding of this output is very, very important.
Awesome. Jake, let me just jump back to one other point before we wrap up. Right, you spoke a moment ago about AI, and obviously AI is the real buzzword at the moment, right? And the likes of Llama and ChatGPT, OpenAI, and so forth are driving a huge buzz in the industry, and there's tremendous benefits from these technologies, but there's also the negative side where you can quickly learn how to exploit specific vulnerabilities that are out there. Where do you see the opportunities for Tenable in the AI space?
Yeah, I look at it twofold, right? So I look at how can we leverage AI for good on our side of the house, and I look at, well, how can attackers leverage AI in order to continue to exploit and continue to attack us, right? From our perspective, what we're doing inside Tenable to leverage AI has been to offer more natural language queries, right? And that's something you're going to see coming to our product in the coming weeks and months. Will be the ability to go in and ask, well, what vulnerabilities do I have that are the worst, right? And then have AI be able to dig that stuff up and give you a natural language response. Because a lot of the times it's difficult to go hunt these things down, and AI can be helpful in that regard, right? In terms of, hey, I want to be able to ask something like I could ask anybody on the street and then actually get a competent response back that I understand. So that's one of the things we're working on, is making this a lot more digestible and easy to use, right? What are bad guys doing? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is people have been thinking about, how can I use AI to write my code for me, right? I don't want to have to sit down and write my scripts or write code for my website. I'll just have AI do it for me, right? I'll get a ChatGPT subscription and ask him to write me a website or whatever. That's great on paper, but one of the things that we're seeing is because AI is trainable, we're seeing attackers train AI to accept malicious code that has their exploits built inside of it. And then when you ask ChatGPT to make something for you, you then receive code that already has malware baked right into it, right? So from our perspective, that's an opportunity for us to be able to say, look, we have tools that can scan infrastructure as code and scan stuff like this and look for potential vulnerabilities that are baked into this code that you copy and paste it off of ChatGPT or another AI solution to make sure that you're not accidentally copying malicious code directly into your organization, right?
Do you see this? Yeah. Do you see this being verticalized? And what I mean by that is that, I mean, if you take healthcare or oil and gas or defense, I mean, they're going to have very similar infrastructure with operating systems from Siemens or GE, and that are going to present similar vulnerabilities given the nature of whatever industry they're in. I guess, I mean, if using large language models that are going to understand the typical footprint of the type of OSs that are sitting in those organizations, that's very powerful for both the good guys and the bad guys, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And we see this application with any technology that comes under the fore as being kind of a game changer, is that it starts out as kind of a broad-based, IT application, or, consumers, a lot of time, consumer application type of software. And then it very quickly becomes verticalized by the markets that need it to have a specialized role entailed, right? So once again, I don't want to be the guy who tells you that everything is awful and on fire, but sometimes everything is awful and on fire. So when I see a new technology come out, I'm like, that's cool. If I'm a bad guy, or if I'm in Chris's shoes, for example, how do I take advantage of whatever this shiny new toy is to be able to break into customer networks, steal data, do overall destructive and bad things? And that's really the eye I've been personally keeping on it, has been, well, how can, this is neat. How can I take advantage of this? How can I exploit this? How can I leverage this particular technology to do my evil bidding, as opposed to being used for good? And, as nefarious as it may be, the bad guys are out there doing the exact same thing, right? They see a new toy that everybody's excited about. Oh, good. Here's a new thing I can take advantage of in order to break into your network and make some money for myself, right? So something to think about.
Well, Jake, on the contrary, I think you're incredibly optimistic for a guy who decided to make his career in dealing with vulnerabilities. So,
well, I am a Bills fan, right? Like, that has to come with the territory of being incredibly optimistic.
Yeah, you embrace pain on an annual basis.
Yep.
Christopher, in your view, where does this industry go over the next 36 months? You're at the coal face, you get your hands dirty on a daily basis in terms of every conceivable area, but you're also at the very exciting innovation phase where technology and AI and all of these cool things are being used and utilized to help solution out issues for clients in a managed environment where they're overstretched and under-resourced. So I'm going to give the last word to you if you want to maybe tell us where does this go over the next 12, 24, 36 months? And is it threat modeling? Is it attack surface management? Is it a mixture of managed service? What is it? What's going to happen?
To be honest, everything can happen, but definitely a number of vulnerabilities detected daily using, let's say, generative AI. New tools, new technologies are going to rising. It's going to become more difficult to manage, more difficult to embrace by every organization. So we will face the moment where organization will start failing with the number of vulnerabilities which they have to digest, prioritize, and assign human force. To the moment where the breaches are going to be more going to occur more frequently, and the damages are going to be way worse than we experienced before.
Okay. On that note, Jake, Chris, thank you for sharing your perspectives on the vulnerability and security testing arena. It's certainly an evolving space. It's a challenging space, and I think you guys, I pushed you quite hard on a few of those areas, and I think you've stood up well to the scrutiny. So thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys. Bye.